The Sacramento Kings just missed the playoffs. The Sacramento Kings are going into an offseason where they could lose their sixth man and one of their most important players, period, in Malik Monk. The Sacramento Kings have clear holes that they need to fill and question marks everywhere. So, out of everything, what are you most concerned about with the Kings in the early stages of the offseason right now? Kevin John from ABC 10, my partner, and I, we will answer that question and air those concerns out right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time. Time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all season long. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs, which helps you find qualified candidates that you want to talk to, and it does it faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports anchor and reporter for ABC 10 News. If you missed part one of my conversation with my partner, Kevin John, pause this episode right now, go back and listen to it. On yesterday's episode, we talked about what we are least concerned about with the Sacramento Kings at this point in time in the early stages of the offseason. So go back and listen to that if you haven't already. But today is for you pessimists. Today is for the dark cloud. Let's talk about what we are most concerned about. And again, this could be a wide variety of things. It could have to do with specific players like Malik Monk and the Kings re-signing him or not re-signing him. It could have to do with the future of the Kings, the past of the Kings, something from this past season that you don't think can be addressed or can be fixed. It could have to do with King stars like Fox or Sabonis. Whatever it is, let's air it out. Let's talk about it. What you're most concerned about with the Sacramento Kings at this point in time. It doesn't mean it can't get better. Doesn't mean it can't get worse. Doesn't mean it can't change, right? We're in May. There's a lot of offseason left. But as of right now, what are you most concerned about? Share it with me. You can do so on the YouTube comment section. If you're watching on YouTube, you can hit me up on Twitter or X at MattGeorgeSac, or you can email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. But let's work through it. Let's talk through it. What we're most concerned about the Kings right now with my partner from ABC 10, Kevin John. All right, so let's get the dark cloud out now. Let's talk about things that we are concerned about this offseason. We'll start with you again. Again, there's a million ways that you could take this, but the first thing that comes to mind when you say, I am concerned about this with the Sacramento Kings on this right now, late May, going into June, this is what I'm concerned about with the Kings. It's what?
Matt, there's one thing. Well, there are two things, but one specifically I'm concerned with the Kings.
Sure.
Them re-signing Malik Monk.
Of course.
Let me explain. That's a great. We all want that.
We're all scared of that.
But them re-signing Malik Monk and potentially extending Mike Brown. The reason I say I'm concerned about those things is because you look at them, obviously everyone wants them to keep Malik Monk here, who should have been sixth man of the year. No disrespect to Naz Reid. But when you look at that, the reason I'm concerned is because if Monty and his crew said, okay, perfect, we re-signed Malik Monk, we got him there, we're going to have a healthy Malik Monk, and then we're going to extend Mike Brown, we're going to be perfect, we don't need to do anything else, we got our pieces in place here, we're going to run it back for next year.
Yeah.
I am entirely concerned with that.
I agree.
Because I don't want them to say, okay, checklist. We got Malik back. Check. We got his extension. We extended Mike Brown. Check. We got that. And whatever else. And then them just saying, okay, wipe our hands. We've done what we needed to do, which is good stuff. I'm not sitting here saying that I don't want that to happen. Of course, I would love Malik back and Mike to get an extension. But that's not all that I would want to be done.
Good isn't good enough, right?
Exactly. And you said it earlier. We've talked about this whole good thing. Mike Brown has said a million times, it's not hard to go bad to good. It's hard to go from good to great. And I think that, yes, it's good for them to get Malik back and Mike Brown, but is that great? Mm-hmm. Is that something that's going to make this team, Matt, a year from now? Are me and you going to be traveling somewhere for the second round of the playoffs to cover the Sacramento Kings? And when you think about that, I think there's still more work to be done. And my biggest concern is them signing Malik, and getting him on and potentially extending Mike Brown, and then them thinking, okay, that's all we need to do.
That was enough.
We're good now. We're good. We got a good team. We're running back. So that's my biggest concern right there. Not to say it's a bad thing, but I still think, Matt, we saw it in the trade deadline. We've seen it with the West. You cannot be complacent. Even when you do something that you think is good, oh my goodness, there's other things that you could do that can be great to get this team to where it's at. Now, obviously, the money talks. There's all different kind of things behind the scenes in order to make a lot of those things come to fruition. But, yeah, my biggest concern is them re-signing Malik and then being complacent or saying that's good enough.
So what you're saying is that should be step one, not the whole plan. Right.
Absolutely. Hell yeah. I'm looking at this like a 5-step process.
Yeah.
And Malik is step one, getting that done. And then obviously there's more steps and more levels to it if you want to be a playoff contending team.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree with you. I thought initially you were going to go the route of I'm concerned about the Kings not being able to re-sign Malik Monk, because that is a concern of mine. This isn't my answer because I've talked about this enough already on this podcast, but I don't see a realm where the Sacramento Kings lose Malik Monk and are a better basketball team. I just don't. It just doesn't exist. Like, they're not. I just don't see a realistic way that they replace what Malik Monk was. Malik was arguably, and this is no disrespect to Fox or Sabonis, Malik was arguably the most important player on the Sacramento Kings last season. Not the best, but the most important to the energy that he brought to the squad on the court and off the court, the leadership that he brought, how he would carry that team when Fox and Sabonis needed to take a break and Fox needed to take a breather because Fox can't play 48 minutes, and it's hard to ask Fox to play more than he played, like, I think 74 games.
Yeah.
Like, Fox only missed like 8 or so games. And that's great for a star, right? There are scenarios where, knock on wood, De'Aaron Fox is playing only 60 games in a season. You need a Malik Monk to carry you through those. There's no replacing De'Aaron, but there's someone that can do the job about as well as you could expect, and Malik is that guy to me. So, but that's not my answer. My concern, and this goes back to the question that I asked Mike at the end of last season, is, okay, we saw how good the defense was to end the year. Like, the final third of the season, that was the defensive growth that Mike's been asking for. And that was, again, proving Mike right. Mike said, like, I would rather us sacrifice our offense and play the way that we did to end the season. And that gets us closer to a title than being the number one offense and scoring 120 points per game. And you look at the playoffs and you look what's happening in the playoffs. There are high-scoring games every now and then, typically from the Indiana Pacers. But other than that, the rest of these games have been in the low 100s or high 90s, sometimes even in the 80s. So Mike's being proven right again and again and again with what it's going to take to win. Where I have my concern is Mike feels that this team still made progress this year because of the growth defensively. I agree with that to an extent. Can you take that defense that you played for a third of the season when it was season on the line, home stretch of the season, you're trying to make up for injuries, and you're fighting for your postseason life? Can you do that for all 82 games? And it's less the start of the season because, look, look how De'Aaron Fox started the season offensively, right? Fresh, full of energy, coming off a big year, pissed off that he was eliminated. He was scoring 30, 40 points a night to start the season for the first month of the year. So October, November, I'm expecting the Kings to have the same defensive energy. I'm talking late December, January, early February, when the All-Star break is in sight. You are exhausted. Are you playing that hard, physical, tough-nosed defense that you ended the season with through that time as well? If you are, then I think you're a team that can actually make some noise and make a playoff run and put yourself in a position in the Western Conference to avoid the play-in altogether. But if not, do you have the personnel to get you through that? And that's where the upgrades this offseason come from. So my main concern, because I haven't seen it yet, is that the Kings are relying heavily on that final third of the season to become a full season's worth of defensive effort. And their personnel right now, the roster is still not built to have that, because even with the Keon Ellis immersion and De'Aaron Fox's defensive development and Keegan Murray's defensive development, this is still a roster that is primary loaded with offensive talent. So one of my themes of this offseason, Kevin, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is get what you're saying your goal is, or the way you want to play, your game plan, make that and your roster in sync or on the same page. Because right now you have a roster that screams offense and you have a head coach and a game plan that screams defense. Get them on the same page.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, Matt, because I remember I caught a little bit of flack from this last year when I said this, when they were going on their, incredible offensive historic streak and whatnot. And I remember I don't want to say I called out Mike Brown because I can't call him out. He has a way bigger basketball IQ than me.
Shut up, Kevin.
Yeah, exactly. He doesn't even know who I am. But
he'll say shut up, Kevin and Matt. He won't care.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, Mike. That's the thing I do like about
Mike's
Brown.
A good dude.
He's definitely, he'll say what he means. But yeah, a lovable coach. But I remember one of the times, I can't remember, it was an NBA Finals post-game show or something that we were doing last year. And I was like, I remember Mike Brown, he came in with this huge defensive intensity. He's always been a defensive-minded coach. And that was one of the things that he even talked about in his introductory press conference. A year ago, or 2 years ago, was play defense. And I remember that one time when we interviewed Steph Curry, ahead of it, we asked Steph, is there anything that Kings players should know about Mike Brown? And I remember Steph even said, if you don't play defense, you're not going to play.
Yeah.
And so there were these high expectations we had defensively for them. Matt, you remember how the Kings ended not this past season, but the season before last, in defensive rating as far as the whole league?
Nearly the bottom of the league.
Exactly. Nearly the bottom of the bunch. And it was one of those things. It was like, well, someone's got to hold them accountable. I get offensively they were outstanding. And if you want to hide behind the fact that they offensively were great last year, I understand where you're coming from. But at the end of the day, this is a defensive minded coach. And also they're going to miss Jordy Fernandez, who is also another brilliant defensive mind as well.
Yep.
Which is a whole other story. And congratulations to Jordy Fernandez. But, that was one of the things. And I just remember saying, well, there's the old cliche, Matt. Offense sells tickets, defense wins championships. And you already referenced it earlier when you're looking at the playoffs and whatnot. But the teams that go further in the playoffs are defensive-minded teams. And I do have to say, even in that series against Golden State last year, we saw some great defense.
Very much so.
We saw some really good defense.
The offense let them down in that series.
That's what I'm about to say, the offense. But defensively, they were great there. So, yes, to answer your question, does this team have the personnel or the roster to be a top defensive team in the league? I don't know. I mean, they have players. You can look at Davion, you can look at Keon, you can look at Keegan, you can look at, you can look at De'Aaron. There's players who they have who I think at the end of the day can hold their ground defensively. But if you're asking, do I look at this team as a defensive team? It's hard to say yes, because you've seen the Kings struggle against great defensive teams throughout the year, throughout this past season. So while I'm sitting here saying, yes, I'm not sitting here saying this is a lockdown top 5 defensive team in the league. I do believe, Matt, that with this roster and with these players, I do believe that defensively they can be great. Like you said, we saw it the last third of the season. Yeah. But can you sustain that for 82 games out of a full year and not just the last 15 or 20 games of the season? That has yet to be determined. But I guess to answer your question, I don't look at this roster and say, well, they can't do anything defensively or they can't get it done defensively. I do feel, Matt, that honestly they can.
Like I said at the top of the show, today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you the access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses find a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have time or the resources to go through the hiring process. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make that process easier. They even have launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process quicker and easier than ever before. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Well, the reality is, too, it can't be a defense or offense thing. It needs to be, the Kings need to get to a position, and they even acknowledge this, where they're certainly top half of the league, but top 10 if they're a top 10 offense and top 10 defense, they're probably competing for an NBA championship because consistently you look at NBA champions and they're in those categories. Not all the time, but most of the time you'll find a team that's top 10 in offense, top 10 in defense. They're not both number one, but if they're in the top 10, they're winning a title because of it, because they're well-rounded on both ends of the ball. Kevin, I'll say this last thing, and then you can give us the last word here as we wrap up. I wonder if you feel this way too. Going back to the personnel matching the game plan, I felt there were a number of times this season where it wasn't necessarily Mike Brown's body language, but his actions spoke louder than his words. Mike Brown was not the type of coach that was ever going to take the podium. He'd call guys out and hold them accountable, but he was never going to be the guy that would throw anybody under the bus. And he's certainly not going to take the podium and go, I have the wrong players on my roster to do what I'm trying to do. He'd never do anything or say anything like that. But there were times where Mike would be looking at his bench, throwing Kessler Edwards in there, throwing Sasha Vezenkov in there after not playing for 2 weeks, the flip-flopping of Davion Mitchell and Keon Ellis at times before he figured out the 3-guard lineup sets at the end of the season. Like, there were times where Mike Brown's actions to me were pointing to his bench, subbing a guy in, and he might as well turn to wherever Monty McNair was sitting and just put his hands in the air like,
help me.
What do you want me to do with this? Like, what do you want me to do? You see the problem. You see where I'm trying to go. I'm telling you where we need to go. I know they have this offensive potential, but if we're missing shots, there's nothing I can do to save them. Defensively, we need to be able to carry ourselves through the games where we're shooting 32% from three as a team. Like, I just feel like those actions, and maybe I'm reading too far into them, but his rotations at time this season were a clear, definitive message to his front office. And maybe it wasn't intended, but I think the message was clear because I interpreted it from my seat way up at the top of the concourse. So Monty McNair sitting close to courtside should be seeing it too. This roster was not on par for what the Sacramento Kings were and are trying to do, and that's what needs to be fixed this offseason.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned the roster, all the roster shakeups and changes earlier in the season, because ironically, that kind of goes against what I said earlier as far as people knowing their roles. I do believe that people knew their roles later in the season, but I do feel that first 2 months, I mean, there were times we saw Chris Duarte starting at the 2. There were times Kevin Huerter wasn't even in the rotation as much, a healthy Kevin Huerter, shall I say. And then Davion, how many DMPs did he have earlier in the season? I mean, it was just a shake. I mean, other than really Harrison, De'Aaron, DeMonis, and Keegan, you had no idea who was going to be on the court, the second unit or whatnot. It was so much. It was Kessler Edwards one night. JaVale McGee was in there a lot earlier in the season. There were so many shakeups, Matt. I remember saying earlier in the season that this is going to be hard for them to build chemistry or hard for them to build camaraderie with each other out there when there's so much going on.
Right.
And I don't know if it was maybe Mike Brown was trying to send a message to Monty saying, look, I'm playing everyone on this roster that you're giving me. You see the product. You see the final score. I have no idea what was going on with that, but I will say, once he started becoming more consistent with his rotations and people started to embrace their roles, which I liked a lot, particularly the last half of the season, you saw things start to shift and change a little bit more. The thing is yes, when you look at the recipe for any good basketball team per se, there's usually a 8 to 9 rotational kind of players that you have, especially a lot of your great championship teams. Not to say you don't go far into the bench or to the deep end of the bench every now and then if you have a couple of players get in foul trouble or what have you. But, the thing is, I personally feel that earlier in the season, and this is just my opinion, I don't know if Mike Brown truly knew what he had in his roster early on. So maybe it was like, okay, I'm going to give this guy an opportunity. Like Sasha Vezenkov, there was a lot of uncertainty with this dude. Yeah, we know he was, a 2-time EuroLeague MVP and whatnot. He was highly decorated coming over here across seas, but we didn't really know what we were going to get from him. And I think that it was kind of the same thing with quite a few other players on there. So Mike Brown, being the brilliant basketball mind that he is, and he's seen everything, done everything, experienced everything, I think he was still like, okay, this is still like the first day of school. I need to figure out what I'm working with in my class here. Who do we have that can do this? Finding strengths and weaknesses. And yes, I get that's what camp is for. You go through that, but it's a lot different going through camp and then being in a game day actual situation or a game environment.
Sure.
In order to see that on display. So with that being said, Matt, I honestly, when you look at all the rotational changes, everything that he was going through earlier in the season, I feel that he got to a point, as we saw, toward the latter half of the season where he knew what everybody was bringing and where players knew their roles and what they were supposed to do. Now, unfortunately, the way the season ended, whether you want to call it injuries or what have you, it didn't manifest into success like we were hoping. But I don't know. I think there's still some uncertainty
for sure
with this roster.
For sure.
And I think Mike Brown still has some uncertainty with this roster.
For sure.
But they're still figuring out, which is why I think this offseason is still going to be a relatively eventful one.
Well, they need to have more answers than they have questions by the end of this offseason. Just the Western Conference will not wait around for them to figure it out anymore. The experimentation time is pretty much over, which is another reason why I feel that what they do with the 13th pick should trend more towards trading it for a more proven commodity than going the route of a rookie, of a question mark and unknown. Maybe there's upside, but how much time do you have to focus on upside when you're winning or trying to win right now? So we'll see what direction the Kings are truly pointing themselves in. I know it's never black and white, super straightforward like we try to make it out to be sometimes. So we'll see what Monty and Mike and the entire Kings staff decide to do. Of course, we'll be all over it, covering it here in Sacramento all offseason long. Kev, this won't be the last time we do this either, so buckle up.
You have me back. I look forward to that, man. Definitely. It's always good to talk sports with you, Matt George, and I feel blessed that I'm on your podcast, man. I don't feel like I deserve this honor, but I'll take it.
You've been in the background of enough of them in this offseason.
In the back of my head, you've seen in them, so
Might as well have the face in every once in a while too.
Well, I'll say this, Matt. The Locked On Podcast, you do have the greatest listeners, the greatest viewers. You have the most passionate, emphatic viewers as well. I've met some of your viewers out and about at certain events, whether it's at Sacyard or what have you around. And, truly, your Locked On Podcast viewers are top of the line. And I'm not just saying that because I'm on here right now saying that. I see you guys when we're out and about.
We're both fortunate enough to work in Sacramento, too, and that's the thing, is the Sacramento fan base, they are loyal to a T, and they're always starved for content. Thank God for a daily podcast format, right? And for daily sportscasters where we have to put out daily sports stories. So y'all are the best. Thank you so much. Hopefully you'll continue to join us here throughout the remainder of this offseason right here on Locked On Kings. This episode of Locked On Kings is also brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you are looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home those wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Shout out to Kevin again for joining me. So we have the things that we're least concerned about, the things that we're most concerned about. We'll see if those concerns have any merit whatsoever or not. The offseason continues, and of course, Locked On Kings will have you covered all offseason long, as well as if you're in Sacramento, ABC 10, always our sports team, Kevin and I, we're always all over not just the Sacramento Kings news, but all over our local sports, from the prep scene in high school all the way up to professionals playing all over the world that are from Sacramento, from our area, college sports. We got it all for you. So tune into ABC 10 as well for great sports coverage that you're looking for there. Appreciate your support. Can't wait to have you join me on the next episode of Locked On Kings. Until then, my name is Matt George. You've been listening to the Locked On Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.